14,113. That is the number of days Peter Sullivan spent in a British prison for a murder he did not commit. 38 years, 7 months, and 21 days. From the age of 30 to the age of 68. More than half of his entire life. Inside. On May 13th, 2025, the Court of Appeal in London quashed his conviction. He watched the hearing by video link from HMP Wakefield Prison. When the ruling was read, he put his hand over his mouth and wept. His lawyer read his statement outside the court. As God is my witness, it is said the truth shall set you free. It is unfortunate that it does not give a timescale as we advance towards resolving the wrongs done to me. I am not angry. I am not bitter. 14,113 days. Not angry, not bitter. I want to go through this case carefully, not because the outcome is uncertain, the DNA has answered the most important question, but because of how it happened, how the wrong man ended up in prison in the first place, how he stayed there for 38 years, and how the evidence that freed him also points directly and unavoidably towards someone else, someone who was on a road in Birkenhead in August 1986, who committed a violent crime, and who has been living freely while Peter Sullivan served 4 decades for it. There are 2 stories in this case. Both of them are unfinished. Stay with me. Diane Sindall was 21 years old. She was a florist. She worked part-time at a local pub to earn extra money. She was engaged, planning a wedding, the specific kind of ordinary future that people at 21 build quietly and take for granted until they cannot. On the evening of August 1st, 1986, she finished her shift at the pub and got into her van to drive home. Somewhere along the road, the van ran out of fuel. It was late, past midnight, by the time she was seen walking along the roadside, heading toward a petrol station to get help. She was last seen alive, walking that road after midnight. Her body was found approximately 12 hours later in an alleyway off Borough Road in Birkenhead, Merseyside. She had been sexually assaulted and beaten severely. She was 21 years old. She had been engaged. She had a job she had gone to that evening like she had probably gone 100 times before. There was no reason to be afraid of a walk to a petrol station. I want to hold Diane Sindall here for a moment before we move to the investigation, because this case has spent nearly 4 decades being defined by the wrong man who was convicted and the fight to free him. And that story matters enormously. But Diane matters first. She was 21. She was walking home. She did not survive August 2nd, 1986. And her family has spent 38 years without a truthful answer about who killed her. That is the wound this case leaves open. Still open today. Police arrested Peter Sullivan within days of the murder. Sullivan was 30 years old. He had been in the area. He had no alibi that fully satisfied investigators. The prosecution theory, presented at trial in 1987, was that Sullivan had been drinking heavily after losing a darts match, armed himself with a crowbar, and attacked Diane Sindall in a random violent encounter. And Sullivan confessed. I want to stop on that sentence and examine it carefully, because in 1986 in Britain, police interviews were not systematically recorded. There was no requirement that a solicitor be present when a suspect was questioned. The Police and Criminal Evidence Act, which introduced protections around interview procedures, had only just come into force. The old practices, the ones it was designed to replace, were still very much in use. Sullivan has described what happened in those interviews. He told the BBC, in his first interview after his release, that he was beaten by officers and bullied into a false confession. He described a specific moment. Investigators asked him to mark on a map where Diane's clothing had been found. He pointed to the wrong place. A detective said to him, in Sullivan's account, "Come on, Peter, you know better than that," and indicated the correct location. He was being guided, not questioned. Guided toward the answer investigators had already decided was correct, he retracted the confession. He maintained his innocence from the moment he understood what he had signed. It made no difference. The confession was central to the prosecution case, and alongside it, presented to the jury as scientific evidence, was bite mark analysis. Bite mark analysis works on the theory that a person's teeth leave a unique impression, identifiable like a fingerprint. In the 1980s and 1990s, it was used in courtrooms as expert evidence. Experts testified with confidence about matches between bite marks on victims and the dental records of defendants. The scientific community has spent the last 2 decades systematically dismantling this discipline. Study after study has demonstrated that bite marks cannot be reliably matched to individuals, that the error rates are too high, the methodology too subjective, the variability between analysts too significant for the evidence to meet any reasonable standard of scientific reliability. Dozens of wrongful convictions in the United States and the United Kingdom have been linked, in part, to bite mark testimony that would not be admitted in court today. Peter Sullivan was convicted in 1987 on a coerced confession and bite mark evidence. He was sentenced to life imprisonment. He was 30 years old. Here is the third evidence failure, the one that, had the technology existed in 1986, would have changed everything. Sexual fluid was recovered from Diane Sindall's body at the crime scene. In 1986, DNA analysis as we understand it today did not exist. The fluid was documented, preserved, and, because there was nothing that could be done with it scientifically at that time, filed as part of the evidence record. It stayed there for 38 years. Sullivan submitted his first application to the Criminal Cases Review Commission in 2008. The CCRC, the body in England and Wales, established specifically to examine possible wrongful convictions, reviewed the case, and declined to refer it back to the courts. The scientific techniques that would later prove critical were not yet available or had not yet been applied to this specific evidence. The decision, in 2008, not to send the case back to court was, the CCRC would state later, the correct decision given what was then known. But it meant Sullivan served another 13 years before his case was reconsidered. In March 2021, Sullivan applied again. He raised 3 concerns: the interview procedures, the bite mark evidence, and questions about the murder weapon. The CCRC consulted new forensic experts, and this time, using techniques that had not been available in 2008. They were able to extract a full DNA profile from the original biological sample. The profile did not match Peter Sullivan, not a partial mismatch, not an ambiguous result. The prosecution's own case was built on the premise that one person had committed the sexual assault and the murder. The DNA from that assault belonged to someone else. As Sullivan's defense attorney Jason Pitter stated to the court, the evidence here is now that one person was not the defendant. The CCRC referred the case to the Court of Appeal in October 2024. 6 months later, on May 13, 2025, Sullivan's conviction was quashed. The courtroom scene has been described by everyone who was present or watching the video link. Sullivan, 68 years old, watching from HMP Wakefield by video link. The judges reading the ruling. The moment the conviction was quashed. His hand going to his mouth, the tears. His sister, Kim Smith, was outside the court. She spoke to reporters afterward. Her words have stayed with me since I first read them. "We've got Peter back," she said, "but the Sindall family still don't have Diane." That sentence does more to describe the true shape of this case than almost anything else said that day. Peter Sullivan is free. The wrong has been partially addressed, partially because 38 years cannot be given back. But the other half of the injustice remains entirely unresolved. The DNA recovered from the crime scene belongs to someone. That someone was present when Diane Sindall was killed. That someone is not Peter Sullivan, is not any member of Diane's family, and is not her fiancé at the time. Merseyside police have confirmed that more than 260 men have been screened and eliminated from the investigation since it was reopened in 2023. The National Crime Agency has been brought in to assist. The investigation is active. The profile exists, and somewhere, in England or elsewhere, now in their 60s or 70s if they were in their 20s in 1986, there is a person who knows what happened on Borough Road in Birkenhead in the early hours of August 2nd, 1986. There is a person who was there, who left, who has known for 38 years that another man went to prison for what they did. 14,113 days. I keep returning to that number because it is not abstract. It is specifically counted, calculated, read into a court record by Sullivan's lawyer as a formal statement of what was taken from him. 30 years old to 68. A life that was not lived because the system that was supposed to find the truth found the wrong answer and held on to it for nearly 4 decades. Peter Sullivan said he was not angry, not bitter. I find that harder to accept than almost anything else in this case. Not because he is wrong to feel that way. It is his experience, his response, and it belongs entirely to him. But because the conditions that produced this outcome, the unrecorded interview, the guided confession, the bite mark evidence, the 3-decade gap before the DNA technology was applied, those conditions are documented failures of a system, and systems that produce documented failures should be angry on behalf of the people they failed, even when those people are not. The case of Diane Sindall remains open. The DNA profile of her killer exists. More than 260 men have been eliminated. The work continues. And Diane Sindall was 21 years old. She was a florist. She was engaged. She was walking to a petrol station on a Friday night in August. She has been waiting for the right answer since 1986. So has her family. Remember Diane. Remember the 38 years. And remember that the case, the real case, is still open.